I'm going to talk about something that I think is often missed when beginners first start in web development. And that's this relationship between the browser and HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And the reason I think it's missed is people just don't stop to think about why it is these three languages are the ones that you're kind of first introduced to when you're getting into the field. But I think it's really important to understand why you're learning those languages and why they're important. So the reason that they're important is because a browser can only read those three languages. A browser can't read Python or C or maybe even a framework you've heard of like React or something like that. It doesn't know what to do with it. It can't read or understand that. It can only read HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So that's why those three languages are the ones that you're kind of first introduced to, especially as a web developer. If you're going to be writing things for the web, then you need to know how to display them on a browser. So what is a browser? A browser is just a software application that lives in your computer. It is not dependent upon the internet. It can work, it can read HTML, CSS, and JavaScript without being connected to the internet, has its own engine and processes for doing that. You can disconnect yourself from the internet, load an HTML file, and it's going to work. And I think we miss that concept a lot because we're always connected to the internet when we're using browsers. And I'll do a quick exercise when I'm sharing my screen later to kind of bring that point home and why you are connected to the internet generally when you're using a browser. So that's a browser. It's just an application that lives on your desktop. HTML, CSS, JavaScript, they're the languages a browser reads. Now, HTML and CSS are markup languages. And what I mean by markup is that they mark up plain text. And plain text is what the name kind of indicates. It's just plain text. And it actually is almost hard for us today to understand what plain text looks like because we never use plain text. We may think we are, but we're not. Whenever you're writing an email or you're in Excel or whatever, I don't care if you're not bolding something or you're not adding style, you're not using plain text, you're using marked up language. Behind the scenes, Gmail or whatever email provider you're using, whatever Word doc you're using, is marking up that language. And so this is an important point because when you're first developing, you need to make sure that you're writing your code in a plain text editor. And the reason being is because if you use Microsoft Word, it's getting marked up. It's getting this extra additional markup that you don't want added to that text. And so you can use something like Notepad if you first want to write HTML or so forth, things that are just plain text editors. But I'd recommend using something that is built specifically for writing code. And there's a lot of free tools out there. There's Sublime and Atom and Visual Studio or VS Code, all great free resources that you can use. But that's the point, is that HTML and CSS are marking up plain text. And I'll show an example of this later when I'm sharing my screen. Now, JavaScript is a programming language. And it's different than a markup language. A programming language, by definition, is a set of instructions. And I think it's still kind of hard to understand that or to conceptualize that. So I like to use an analogy that's a non-computer analogy. And the one I like to use is that of a pianola. If you've watched Westworld, then you know what a pianola is. It's an automatic piano that plays music based off of like notched paper that's inputted into it, and then it just plays its keys automatically. And in Westworld, the opening credits, they have a pianola playing with kind of like Black Hole Sun or something playing. So a pianola is taking in notched paper, and then it reads that notched paper and it automatically plays its keys. Well, that notched paper technically is a programming language. So it's a set of instructions, and the pianola, much like a browser, knows what to do with that set of instructions and then does something about it. So a browser, when it sees JavaScript, knows what to do with it and does something about it. It can read those set of instructions. That's why if you feed the browser something like Java or Python, some other type of programming language, it doesn't know what to do with it. It can't read it. It's not meant to read those other languages. So this is why JavaScript is the most popular programming language in the world, has been and will continue to be for the foreseeable future, because browsers are very accessible. Everyone uses browsers, they know how to use them, and it makes writing JavaScript very easy because all you need is a browser. Whereas with other programming languages like Java or C or whatever you're using, you need a special tool in order to kind of read and interpret those. You need your own pianola for those languages. So that's why HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are kind of always combined when you're first starting out in web development. And that's why they're important for the browser. They have this very intertwined relationship. So next I'm going to show you, I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to show you the first website ever built. And then I'm going to go through some of the concepts that I just talked about. Okay, so this is the first website ever built. It's still live today and it works. And it's pretty amazing that it's still up there. The reason that it's still up there and still works is because it was written in HTML, and HTML is the foundational language of the web. All websites are built in HTML, and then they've got some CSS and JavaScript added to them. And you can even see this in the URL. It says .html at the end. Now, CERN is the company that wrote this, and this was like in the early 90s when this website came out. And CERN, you may have heard of them. They're responsible for colliding particles together very quickly over in a physics lab in Europe. They're very cool. But they built this website, and there's not much to it, right? This was before CSS. And so it's literally just marked up plain text. You've got this is a title tag or a header 1 tag, and the browser says, okay, I know what to do with header 1 tags. I make them look like this. So I'm actually going to quickly show you that. And I'm going to do this by using something called the developer tools. So I'm on Chrome, and if you just right click on a web page and you say inspect, you're going to pop up the developer tools. And I like to think of especially the elements panel here, which we just landed on, as kind of like the back side of a stitching. So if the front side of a stitching is the web page, something that's pretty and you can see, the back side is kind of like the ugly side, right? And it's the HTML. And this is old HTML. This is like beginning HTML. So a lot of these tags we don't use anymore, like DT or DD are not things that we're using anymore in HTML, but this header 1 is. This is something that you'll see throughout learning about HTML. And remember I told you that HTML just marks it up and then the browser knows what to do with it? Well, here's a great example. So this is what we call a header 1 tag. And so we just marked up this plain text, put this World Wide Web between the header 1 tags. And then the browser was like, oh, I know what to do with header 1s. I display them at this font size and I do these different things to them. Now that's the browser's own interpretation of what it does to a header 1. This can vary between browsers. There might be slight differences. For the most part, they're all the same, but they may display header 1s a little bit different. But this is the browser's CSS that it's applying naturally. Now I can apply my own CSS to this, and we apply CSS under the styles pane. And I'm going to kind of rush through this. This isn't a course on HTML or CSS, so don't get too caught up in the syntax here. But I'm going to select this header 1. So I've got this header 1 kind of selected. And then I'm going to say color, let's call it aquamarine. So now you can see that that text now has an aquamarine. And then if we look under the header 1 tag, this HTML, it's got a style attribute, which is HTML. But it's a special attribute that says, okay, I'm going to put some CSS on this particular header 1. And the CSS I'm going to put here is color aquamarine. So that's how CSS and HTML kind of work together. HTML gives us structure, CSS gives us style. Okay, so the other comment I made was that HTML and CSS are just marking up plain text, but that we may not know what plain text looks like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this, and then I'm going to go to a website that just takes in HTML or any type of markup and then turns it into plain text. So I just pasted it here. I had already pasted it before, but I pasted it here, and you can see that this is what plain text looks like. So if you're curious, this is plain text. This is not the same type of text in your email or in a Word doc. This is plain. It doesn't have any markup associated with it. And so as you might imagine, it's plain and fairly boring. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to show you is this concept of the browser being able to work without the internet. And I'm going to do this very quickly because I'm going to kind of psych out my recording thing. If I'm off the internet for too long, then it freaks out. So what I've done already, and I'm going to shut these developer tools, is I've right-clicked and I've saved this website, and I've saved it. It just comes naturally as a web page, so it's an HTML file, and it's in my downloads. I've already saved it, and then it's down here. I'm going to open this, and you can see now in the URL that it's looking in my downloads for this file. It's not looking anywhere on the internet. It's actually looking on my users, Chris Lunning, downloads. And this isn't my computer, but it's looking in the downloads folder. And it's able to display this. Now I'm going to put these side by side. Now what happens if I turn the internet off? All right, so if I refresh this, you can't get to this web, it doesn't show anything. But if I refresh this, it still works. Now I'm going to jump back on the internet. This, of course, is still going to work, and this will now also work. Now, why is that? Why did one work and the other didn't? Well, this one did not work because of the URL. The URL is telling the browser where to get the HTML document. And in short, it's the URL is a location somewhere on the internet, and the internet is essentially just a bunch of computers that are connected to each other. And so this URL is telling the browser, go to this computer out on the internet and find that HTML document. That's the one I want, and that's the one you should display. So it's not that the browser can't display the HTML document, it's that it can't even get the HTML document to display. And that's why it errors out. And that's generally why you always use the browser with the internet. But if you have the file on your own computer, the browser doesn't need to go anywhere to get that file. It's on your computer. It can display it easy peasy. Same thing with CSS or JavaScript, it could display those things as well and process those things. Okay, the last thing I wanted to show you is this concept between a web page and a website. And I think this is more important today than it was, say, even 5 years ago, largely because of this new thing called single page web applications. And they're not even really new, they've been around for a while, but the term gets thrown out very often and it doesn't get really discussed what it actually means. And I think the best way to understand what a single page web application is to understand what a website is and what a web page is. So a website is a whole bunch of HTML documents. It's more than one HTML document. And it's when you click on one link to go to another page, you download another HTML document. And I'm going to show you that again by going to the developer tools. And I'm going to go to something called the network panel. And the network panel shows me everything the browser is trying to fetch over the internet. And so when I'm in this particular website, when I go to another page, it actually has to fetch another HTML document. And we're going to see that. So watch down here, and I'm going to click on this hypermedia link. And you can see that the browser had to go fetch this other HTML document. And that's this whatis.html. Now I can go back, and it's got to fetch the my project or the project.html file. So it's multiple HTML files. A single page web application or a web page is just one HTML file. So you might be thinking, well, how much could I actually do in one web page? Well, you can do a lot. Facebook, Twitter, those are all single page web applications. And the way that works is beyond the discussion of this video. But the idea is that it's dynamic. So you have one HTML file and it's dynamically loading a bunch of things. And so developers, they may see in their code base, they may see more than one HTML file, but when everything gets ready to be shipped to the browser for this package that the browser knows it's going to read, it comes down to one HTML file. And that's a single page web application. Okay, so I think we've covered quite a bit here. I really just wanted to stress that the relationship between HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and the browser. Because I think once you have a concept of that, it will help guide you as you might be questioning, like, why is it important for me to learn this? Or how much JavaScript do I need to learn? So if you have any questions or you'd like us to cover any topics in the future, please comment down below. And then also do subscribe. We're going to have other authors talk about their own books and do similar videos as well. So thank you very much.